The Phenomenon is a brand new documentary about UFOs. We're talking with the film's creator today, so let's get strange. Hello, citizens, and welcome to the first episode of our new show, simply titled The Rogue Planet Show. I'm Jason McClellan, and together with my fellow Rogue Planeteers, we're bringing you news, stories, commentary, and interviews related to the topics we love. And that encompasses all the strange, UFOs, the search for extraterrestrial life, the paranormal, local lore, and more. Today, Maureen Elsberry and I interview our friend, the filmmaker James Fox. James has created some of the best documentaries ever made about the UFO subject, and he just released his latest offering, titled The Phenomenon. James, it is fantastic to see you, my friend. It has been too long, and I'm excited to have you on today because we are talking about a brand new film from you. And I gotta say, man, this has been a long time coming because we've been waiting on this thing. You first started telling us about it back in 2013, back when the working title was 701. And I mean, this thing has really gone through a whole hell of a lot to get where it is today. So if you wouldn't mind, walk us through the story of how this whole thing came together and how the project changed over the years.
How much battery life do you have on your computer's plugged in, or?
Give us the brief version. I know this is an epic saga, the entire thing, but give us a condensed version.
This is going to be a 2-drink minimum, so get ready. No, in all honesty, I'll take you back to Out of the Blue. When I finished Out of the Blue, I think I was like the better part of 5 years into it. And I kept pushing because you have a certain vision of how you want something to be, when you set out to do it. And it just I never quite got there with Out of the Blue. And I remember this moment I'll never forget. My partner, Boris, was in fetal position on the ground, crying and just sobbing and looking totally defeated. And his wife looks at me and she's like, Jesus Christ, James, this movie, you're killing my husband. I mean, we were pushing pretty hard. Anyway, that last push is pretty intense, but I wasn't satisfied with Out of the Blue. And 3 years later, I owned it again, and I decided to revisit Out of the Blue. Of course, I had to get new partners on board because they were just like, what are you crazy? But you have a vision of how you want something to be, and it takes a long time to have that come to fruition. You know what I mean? And so I spent a couple more years on Out of the Blue. I re-released it. It was much better, but I still wasn't happy. This film, then of course I Know What I Saw, and a similar case. I mean, I sort of stepped it up. I believe I stepped it up with I Know What I Saw. Some people might disagree, but when the film was done, I still didn't feel satisfied, and I remember very distinctly when I sold it to A&E. It was going on History Channel, and my dad's like, son, what's going on? I'm like, I don't know, Dad. I really feel like I let myself down a little bit. And he's like, well, what are you talking about? I was like, well, I had higher hopes with film. And it's going on History Channel. And he's like, yeah, but look at what you did do. And I guess what I'm saying is this journey was the culmination of 3 previous film projects, learning from each film what I had done wrong, what I wasn't satisfied with, why it didn't reach its full potential, why I didn't get to the point that I was aiming for. And so, I went through a number of producers, of partners, I ran out of money a whole bunch of times, and I said, I'm not going to settle for less. Like, if I don't have the money to do it right, I'm going to wait until I do. And again, that takes time. And so I just kept pushing and pushing and pushing. And even when we got a rough cut done, a little over, I was getting, like basically putting the pieces together. And then, of course, the ATIP on the front page of the New York Times was like hit. We never would have expected that. And that added another couple of years because we were like, we got to go after this person. We got to go this, And so here we are, the better part of 8 years later, from concept to completion, and it's coming out. Hope I didn't give you the long-winded version.
Well, Jason mentioned when you first told us about when you first told us about the film that it was going to be titled 701 and it was going to be focused on these 701 cases of Project Blue Book that were still unexplainable by the government. And then now with the phenomenon, you've expanded that and gone into a much bigger dive into the history behind, and then these modern day cases, as you mentioned, once the ATIP news came out, that took on a whole new government angle. So I guess I'm curious about the evolution. Like, when did you look at it and say, this just isn't focused on Project Blue Book anymore? This is turned into a whole new beast.
Well, the title 701 for us was symbolic of that residual core 10 or 15% of cases that just defied a sort of terrestrial explanation or a conventional explanation. It wasn't like we set out with 701 to just focus on Project Blue Book files, because that wasn't the case at all. And we were already doing the Rua Zimbabwe case at the time. And so what happened was, without naming names, there were some of my partners that wanted to do a hybrid of fictionalize. So they wanted to do like half fiction, half fact, sort of hybrid. And I didn't want any part of it, and we went back and forth. And finally we amicably parted ways. And I went off with one of the producers, and the other three producers went off to do their hybrid. And it looked as though they had funding from a billionaire, which I was a little jealous about, but I didn't want to go that route. And so I think their project ended up kind of fizzling out a little bit. I don't think they ever, in fact, I know they didn't get funding. And I branched off and got new financial partners and continued my initial, pursuit of producing the seminal documentary feature film, all based on fact, just full documentary, no fictionalization whatsoever.
So there are some really cool things in this film, and touching on Blue Book, we mentioned Blue Book. One of my favorite things, of course, is the interviews with Bill Coleman and Robert Friend, both people from Project Blue Book, and Maureen and I were fortunate to interview both of them several years ago. So it's very cool that you got the interviews with them in this film. So what was it like for you interviewing these guys?
Well, I remember it was more of a concept. We were just forming the LLC and kind of getting our whole strategy down when I was just adamantly saying, we got to go get Coleman. He's in Florida. And I remember my investor at the time, he's like, everybody cool your jets here. Well, we're going to put together a plan. We're going to get the budget. And I'm like, no. You don't understand. We got to go to this guy. Like, this is really, like, every bit of my being was like, now. And finally, I just made so much noise that he was like, okay, just go. And off I went and got Colonel Coleman. And what I found so fascinating about him is that, he has this incredibly compelling, encounter with this disc. One of the most fascinating encounters I'd ever heard, because proximity to the disc and broad daylight and the length of the duration of the sighting was like 9 minutes. And he's chasing this thing, and he's telling me this really dramatic story. And he's got these, engineers from Boeing and Lockheed in the plane as well. And they end up at treetop level at maximum continuous power. And I'm like, what does that mean? He goes, if I went any faster, I would have blown up the motors. We were at treetop level, and I thought I was going to hit this thing. And I had to take evasive action, but I couldn't turn the plane because the wings were going to hit the tree. So I had to pull up first go up and around this thing. And it was just like sitting there just going, God, this guy was the public spokesman for our public relations officer for Project Blue Book, like whatever it was 15 years later. And I just thought, this is incredible. And I was really shocked that his story, that no one had gotten a proper 60-minute style sit down interview with this guy. You know what I mean? And so I was so glad that we did that. And then I got to sit down with him outside of his home in Florida afterwards, kind of casual, just talking, getting B-roll and stuff, and having him. He was so funny. He's so pragmatic. He's going, well, you know, James, we have this old term, we pilots, we got to kick the tires. We got to get out there on the tarmac and kick the tires. I was like, well, what do you mean by that? He's like, well, I don't know what it is we saw because I never had the opportunity to go out and kick the tires of this thing. I'm like, how do we even know this thing has tires? But he said, you know, it was a wonderful time. We went out to dinner afterwards, and then we kept in touch for a few months after, and unfortunately, as you well know, he passed. So the last image I have of Robert Friend, he was on the dance floor. Probably we did an interview, sit-down interview at our place at a shoot location in Los Angeles. We're like, well, we're going to go out to dinner. We had a long shoot day. We're going to go out to dinner and at this place, thinking that he was going to decline because he was in his 90s. I said, well, we're going to go. If you'd like to join us, oh, I'd love to. So he goes to this restaurant and they're serving drinks and we're all like having some cocktails and having food. And next thing I know, he's up on the dance floor with like a couple of production assistants and he's boogieing down, I kid you not, on the dance floor until like midnight. And then he kisses everybody goodbye and he jumps in this fancy Cadillac and zooms off into the night. And that was the last I ever saw of him.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
he had a really good sense of humor. Sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say, you can see that when he's kind of battling back and forth with you in the movie and, says it's more, I don't want to get too much into it to reveal much, but he's got that weird sense that where you can't tell whether he's trying to drop secret hints to you of something he knows that he can't really say. And he did the same when we were questioning him. And it's this weird vibe, but he's got kind of a smirk, like he's trying to let you in on the joke.
I said to him, I'll never forget it. We were walking I did a couple of interviews, one in a hangar in Los Angeles, and then another one, we did the sit down. And after the interview in the hangar, we were walking back from the hangar to the airport and across the tarmac. And I said, Colonel, I have a sneaky suspicion that deep down inside, you know a lot more than what you're sharing. And he's like, looked at me and he goes, well, I've already gone deep down inside, and I'm telling you right now, like he just had this like really funny comeback, and we had a good laugh, and he had a wonderful sense of humor. Yeah. The most poignant statements he made to me was what happened on the night of the 2 consecutive weekends in July over the Capitol. That seemed to puzzle him the most. Yeah.
Well, the B-25 footage was amazing. And, throughout production, it was great because you would periodically send me, some photos and video of what you were up to during the process. And you sent me that video of you climbing around in that B-25 and the flight you got to do. That was so epic. I'm jealous.
It's really funny. We had a couple of, Lee Spiegel had helped locate a B-25. And when I was in Florida interviewing Coleman, we had this cameraman, David West, and he's a phenomenal camera guy. And he literally, we looked at each other in the middle of the interview, and I looked at him and I said, this is going to be the opening scene of the movie, and we're going to rent a B-25. Of course, it was like this really pie in the sky idea at the time, but it took about 5 years. But, we did. We rented that plane, and I actually called the company because we had 2 options. And one of the outfits looked like more polished and more kind of corporate, and the plane was sparkly clean and kept in a hangar. And the other one was sort of outside and a little more, slightly, what's the word I'm looking for? I don't want to say run down, but just a little gritty,
weathered.
I guess. Weathered, gritty, it looked like these were the real dudes doing it, So I called them up. I'm not sure. I walked in the office. I called them up. And I said, gentlemen, thank you, by the way, for getting back to me. If you guys can't fly flat out at treetop level, then I have to go somewhere else. And they said, I think we could do that. So then I got to go in the bubble. It's the front nose. And it's got like machine guns. And it's all glass. And to get to it, I had to come down from the cockpit area, which is rather small. It's not, that plane is not that big. I had to climb down, and I had to go through this tube. It's a very narrow tube. I had to sort of inch my way through there like a worm. And, shoulders rubbing on both sides. And I finally pop out into this like bubble, this glass bubble, and the machine gun's still there. And I can't tell you, like the feeling I had was like you're in this bubble floating above. I mean, you feel really vulnerable. Like, if anything goes wrong, you're the first person to get it. Right? But I'd
be a little scared.
Yeah. And then the plane going down to the treetop level. I told my partner Rebecca and I think my son was old enough at that point. Yeah, he was. I told him what I did like after the fact. Anyway, yeah, it was pretty cool. But I mean, what a dynamic opening, right?
So awesome. I mean, that footage is priceless. It really is. So you worked with some pretty great people on this film. You mentioned our buddy Lee Spiegel, of course. Your awesome narrator, Peter Coyote, and Jacques Vallée. So I'd love to hear how and when Jacques got involved and what it was like working with him.
So I had made several attempts over the last couple of decades to reach Jacques because Jacques lived in San Francisco. And I live just north. And unsuccessfully. And then Lee became involved with the project. And he's like, well, I know Jacques quite well from the 1978 United Nations event that we did together, that he organized. And I think I could, set up a meeting. At the time, Lee was out in California working with me. And he did. And initially, Jacques said, he was sort of standoffish about the whole thing. Non-committal. And then he said, I think he agreed to the fact that he would comment on a certain participation of the Rockefeller Initiative. And that's how it kind of got started. And then Jacques came out to the studio and we were editing the movie at the end of a dirt road in a little like shoebox shack. And it had no electricity, no running water, no toilet, and no internet. And so we had to run a wire out from the main house into this garden, and we were editing there. And initially it was just because I couldn't find anything else to rent in the area where I live. And it was sort of a temporary spot. But then I realized like we got so much good isolation and work done in this magical little spot. And Jacques would start coming out on the weekends, just kind of checking out what we were sitting on. And he looked at the Rua stuff and he looked at the Socorro stuff, and he was intimately involved with Socorro because he was with Dr. Hynek at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base about 2 or 3 days prior to that event happening. And he was explaining to Hynek, look, you've got to look at the psychological cases that are written off as part of Project Blue Book because those represent close encounters of the third kind, close encounters. And Jacques was telling him there's all these files, you've got to look in those that explain the way it's psychological. And he was explaining what was happening in France and the wave of landings and close encounters in France. And he got this whole tour of Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, and it was 1964 in April. And then literally, I think a day or two later, the phone call comes in, landing at Socorro, New Mexico, and Jacques. So that case was very, very close to Jacques. So he saw that I had spent 5 years going back and forth to Socorro, got to know the family, his wife Mary, the daughter Diane, the son Michael, his co-workers. I interviewed all of them. I mean, it took a while. Like as an outsider, they were not like, come on into our town and interview it. I mean, it really took a while. And I got in with Mary, the wife, because actually of a document I found at the National Archives with Ray Stanford about the actual symbol on the craft. So I kind of broke the ice with her on that. But anyway, so Jacques saw all this amazing material, and he's like, hey, I want to help you put this together accurately. And so he became more and more involved. And then finally he was doing marathon edit sessions with us in the studio. And when it got to Roswell, he would sit back in the studio, and he would just sit back in the back, and he'd go, just the facts, ma'am. Be really careful, just the facts. Anyway, and that was it. And so Jacques eventually invited us into a lab in Silicon Valley, and it was just, I was just gobsmacked, quite honestly, by the whole process. And I feel incredibly privileged to have had the opportunity and developed a relationship. And it all goes back to Lee Spiegel.
Gotta say, it would have been, if I had a time machine, think of how awesome it would be to party with Lee Spiegel and Jacques Vallée in the 70s. That would be awesome.
Totally. Hey, they're fun to party with right now.
No, I do like how in the credits, Lee's credits highlight that he was the one person at the United Nations presenting UFO information at the end. It's kind of this great thing that I think a lot of people don't realize about Lee. They know was a Huffington Post journalist that was, the most vocal person out there writing about UFOs, but he has an incredible backstory tied into a lot of really major breaking changes in how we research and look at UFOs. So great person to work with.
Yeah, very cool that you did put that in the credits, because Lee is a badass and people should know that.
Yeah, well, really quickly, Maureen, just trying to expand on that, I had reached out to you at one point to see if you wanted to come on for a year or two on the project to be an archivist, because my sister, who normally I work with, was becoming a nurse. She got certified. She was moving to different locations, and she wasn't available. So I was like, I think I reached out to you. I reached out to a couple of people, and long story short, she ended up taking a hiatus. Did I reach out to you too?
Yeah.
Jason? Yeah.
Yep.
I ended up taking, my sister ended up saying, you know what? I'm just going to not go to school. I'm not going to go to transition to this new nursing job. I'm going to take a hiatus for a year or two, and I'm going to work solely on finding archival material. Well, fast forward about 6 months, I think Lee had been out to California a couple of times. He was kind of going back and forth from New York out to California, and he was really, really funny. He's all, the deer, they're coming to get me. He's like, they're on the roof. I'm like, deer don't climb on the roof, Lee. What are you talking about? Well, anyway, so fast forward probably 6 months, and Kelly has been sending me links to certain things that she's finding. It's just her sole purpose is looking for archive material, and she's going at it, 8, 10, 12 hours a day. So she finds this stuff, and it's labeled like UFO conference. That was it. And every day she'd send me like, hey, is this of interest? Do you like this? Is this anything you want? I can go after it here. Well, she sends me a link, and quite honestly, like 9 times out of 10, I'm like, maybe that's been beaten to death. Then I like kind of reluctantly clicked on all these links, and I click on this one link, UFO conference, and I'm thinking to myself, UFO conference, like I don't really want to feature a UFO conference, in this film. Well, I clicked on it reluctantly, and I'm looking, and I'm going, oh my God, this looks like the United Nations. So I verify it. This is the event that no one has ever seen at the United Nations. And I send a small clip of it with a stamp on it of the company that we got it from to Lee. And I said, are you sitting down? Click the link. And of course, we found the unedited 2-hour presentation at United Nations that he had done 40 plus years earlier. And both Jacques and Lee were so floored, and we were just jumping for joy. And then what it took to actually get our hands on the physical, like, I could go on until you guys are ready. But we got it.
That's awesome. And I will say, the archival footage in this film is a big part of what makes it really special. Kelly did an amazing job, and it's some of my favorite stuff in the film. It really helps tell the story. Yeah,
I agree. Yeah. And also, I was super bummed that I could not say yes to that opportunity, because I would have loved to have been part of the film. It was just bad timing. But looking at what she did, looks like she did a fabulous job with acquiring all these old materials. And I think a lot of people who research UFOs will notice, like, well, a lot of this stuff has never been seen before. But for new people, like this is groundbreaking that this is able to be seen by the public in the depth that it is.
Well, you guys, you remember when I Know What I Saw came out back in 2009, I think it was, almost 2010. It was going to get picked up by Lionsgate, and Lionsgate was going to, this global distribution footprint, and I'm super duper excited. And then they ultimately took a pass on it because they were like, the production values are a little substandard, and we're going to go ahead and take a pass. And I was, of course, devastated. But I said I won't make that same mistake. And so this time, even with the archive material, I went after not just a digital copy, but the original source. So if I could find the filmed footage, I would pay to have the film footage digitized. And then once I got the footage, I hired specialists to either color correct or do a pass with this filter called Neat Filter. It was incredibly complicated and required a lot of processing time, but it really cleaned up a lot of the archive footage. I mean, the archive footage we got was really good, but what a difference it would make, because I wanted it to look good too, you know, and not cringe every time some archive footage came on. The sound, and then on top of it, because it was going to be in movie theaters. Little cry here. Yeah. Because it was going to be in movie theaters, everyone was saying, look, man, you have got to you got to hire a proper sound engineer. It's going to make or break your success in a theater. You cannot have crap sound. The image quality is one thing, but bad sound is going to put people off. They're going to be irritated. They're not going to know what it is they don't like about your movie. But trust me, they will tune out, and you'll be missing out hugely. Like it's like a lot. They were saying it's like 60% of a movie. So I hired a sound engineer, which was an incredibly, timely process and expensive process. But those little details ended up making just a really significant difference for the film, I believe.
You brought up one case that I think really highlights, and I love the placement you put this in the movie, because I think it has a good message, because you're kind of going through all this history and study and showing that this is something the government's taken seriously over the years, and there's a lot happening we don't know about behind the scenes. But then you also have this kind of, you go over the RUA, the Ariel School incident case, and the Westall 66, and the power of those interviews at the end, and the archival words that the kids are saying, and to what they feel now, and how it's this message of, I think it ties into a lot of the nuclear connection too, about we're doing things that are not great for this planet, and we're seeing that now in full force with the way, the global warming and tons of other sort of environmental tasks. So what was it like for you going to interview these children as adults in that area?
Well, first what we did is we brought them together with the help of Randall Nickerson. We brought them together in Los Angeles. We found them and brought them in from all different areas of the world, quite honestly. And I remember at the time I was trying to justify it to, the investors, like, they're like, oh, you're going to fly these people in? I mean, a UFO landed in Africa, and come on. Like, I'm going, no, just look at this archive materials that John Mack shot. Look at these kids. That was a tough sell. But bringing them together for the first time in 20 years, and coincidentally, a lot of them happened to be like, wait a minute, we were standing right next to each other. You remember? We were holding hands. It's like, wow. And I knew it was such a special day. And I said to the people that were there with us, because we had a big kind of crew, and I explained sort of, what this day actually meant and what had actually gone down. And it was a magical 3 or 4 days that we got to spend with them. And there was one thing that I'd like to share with you guys now that I don't know why. You look back and you think, why didn't I put that in? Like, that part was so powerful, but you can't get everything in, right? I mean, but they said to me, because they'd had time to sort of reflect and really analyze what had gone down as children, and as they got older, adults and young adults and professionals, they'd had a couple decades to really think about it, reflect on it, and just absorb it. And they said, have you ever been out in the wild, in the wilderness, and you come across, a rare sighting of a wild animal? And they're like, there's this moment of intrigue, of mystery, where time is frozen, and you're just as interested in they as they are interested in you. And there's just that moment where the clock stops, and it's benign, it's curious. Each side is equally as bewildered as the other. They said that's what it was like with the creatures. They were just as fascinated to learn about the children as the children were them. And then they also said that there were these I guess telephone poles, big logs that would define the outer perimeter of the playground. And of course, children being children, though, they weren't allowed to go any further than those logs because of it was unmanicured, unmowed, and there were dangerous snakes and stuff out in the fields. So what the children would do is they would go all the way to the outer perimeter of the playground, and they would skip along the logs. And there were children saying, as adults now, that these creatures, beings, were mimicking the children skipping along the tops of the logs next to them. Like almost kind of slow motion. And I said, well, did they have legs? Didn't really quite see. They were almost like foot, but they were jovially, imitating, what the children were doing. And I just thought, wow, that's just beautiful. Just think of that wonderful transaction, that wonderful interaction. I don't know, and I don't know why that description didn't end up in the final cut. I guess you can only get so many things in, but that was one of the most special days of my life. And then going to Africa and meeting more of the students and going to the actual landing site, and then of course getting Judy Bates, who's now the head mistress, who was getting her camera was a total coup, because she's like, I'm not going to go on camera with you, but you can go out and you could film at the in the field, and you could do all this stuff. And then right in the middle of filming with her former students, here she comes, walks on out, and we literally just pivot, turn the cameras on her, and we got what we got.
That was awesome. Yeah, the school stuff was definitely some of my favorite stuff in the movie. There's so much in the movie, but the school stuff is really powerful. The testimony, the archival footage, and I mean, not only the children, the people who were children now grown, but also the adults who were witnesses. That stuff was really powerful to hear. So definitely my favorite part of the movie. I know we've taken a lot of your time, so we'll wrap this up, but something that tugged at my heartstrings was seeing the film's dedication. You dedicated the film to an icon of UFO research, that is the late great Stan Friedman. So what made you dedicate the film to Stan?
I admired him so much. I had so much respect for him. I cried for 3 hours when he died.
Wow.
It was respect.
Yeah. Yeah, well deserved, and I can't think of a better way to cap off that film. And something else that I do have to mention to people: make sure to watch all the way through the credits, because of course you pulled that game where you inserted some of the best content in the end credit sequence. So don't turn the movie off when you see the credits start rolling, because there is some amazing stuff in there for sure.
It's a Marvel style documentary.
Sorry,
where there's some juicy stuff.
Exactly. Well, I know you didn't get the theatrical release that you wanted, that you did work really hard and secured for this film, but COVID screwed up a lot of things, including this film. Yeah. But tell us how people can watch the film.
So it's available for digital download, Amazon, Google, Xbox, iTunes. And there's a couple of platforms. Actually, if you go to the phenomenonfilm.com, it's got a link to all the different platforms. And there are only 2, I believe, that include, once you digital download, about 3 hours of just wonderful outtakes and additional bonus material that I think people are going to really like. I went through a long, lengthy process putting that together as a bonus package. So, but again, there's only a couple of platforms that allows you to do bonus material, and I think it's
Vimeo has it. Vimeo has it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So you go to the phenomenonfilm.com, and that'll guide you through that. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, James, thank you so much for taking the time to hang out with us. And dude, so happy this day has finally come. Glad the film is seeing the light of day. And thank you so much for sharing it with us. I mean, it's been so much fun going along this ride with you.
Thanks for having me on. I'm sorry I broke up. Stanton Friedman and Edgar Mitchell, two people that we lost, and I was profoundly affected by their passing, just profoundly affected. And so I was so glad to have the opportunity to dedicate the film to Stanton Friedman. I have so much respect for that guy.
It's awesome.
Absolutely.
It was so great to catch up with James today and talk about his new film. The Phenomenon is out now, so if you're at all interested in UFOs, definitely check it out.
Thanks so much for joining us today. Make sure to subscribe to the Rogue Planet YouTube channel if you haven't already, and find us on social media, because that's how you'll know when we post new content.
Farewell, citizens. We will see you in the future.